If you're from Cincinnati, you've probably been wondering over the years why there are so many Steelers fans in our city, the Queen City. Well, today we're finally getting to the bottom of that here on Locked On Bearcats.
Our Locked On Bearcats, your daily podcast on the Cincinnati Bearcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you so much for making Locked On Bearcats your first listen every day. On a Friday, we are presented by Rock Auto. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com and tell them Locked On sent you. Alex Frank here with you, former sports director of UC's Bearcats Media. And today I am joined by the host of Locked On Steelers, Christopher Carter. Now, why am I having you, Chris, on the show today? Well, it's something that I've always wondered. I'm sure you in Cincinnati are wondering this too, Bearcats fans, Bengals fans alike. Why there are just so many Steelers fans residing in our city, the Queen City. It's not just that. I mean, the University of Cincinnati has or did have, and I wish they still did, have a famous rivalry with the University of Pittsburgh, the River City Rivalry. We'll talk to Christopher Carter about that. So, Chris, let's cut to the chase. Why do you think there are so many Steelers fans? And I get it, the two cities, Cincinnati and Pittsburgh, they're separated, by what, 4.5 hours, 4 hours. But why are there so many Steelers fans in Cincinnati, in your opinion?
It's Steeler Nation, man. They've been all over the country for so long. It's not just Cincinnati. You go to Miami, you experience that. San Francisco, Tampa Bay, New York, Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona. It is crazy. It's a crazy phenomenon why they call it Steeler Nation, because it's literally everywhere you go, you will find Steelers fans. And in fact, there's a book called Always a Home Game, where a former Steelers punter, Josh Miller, went to over 100 Steelers bars outside of Pittsburgh, just random cities, and details them and says, this is what they have, this is what they have. I've been to some of them, and you'd be amazed by how crazy this fan base is all over the country. And it's Cincinnati has their base. You're in Ohio, it's pretty close to Pittsburgh, so there's a lot of Steelers fans. There's a lot of Steelers fans in Cleveland. It's because they're even closer to Pittsburgh. But it's a common phenomenon that happens everywhere. When I was in college, I went to a Steelers Cardinals game at the University of Phoenix Stadium. They took over the stadium. The Steelers fans were just it wasn't slightly more, it was dominantly so. And this is 2,500 miles away, and there were more Steelers fans there. There's a bar out in Phoenix, Arizona, called Harold's, that's known as the largest Steelers bar west of the Mississippi. And my uncle used to live there. He said, Chris, I had to buy a season ticket pass to be able to sit in this bar to watch a Steelers game. That's how crazy the fandom is. And it's not just Cincinnati, it's everywhere. It's always been a thing. I think a lot of it stems from the Steelers' success, but some of it also stems from Pittsburgh as a population decreased from like the 60s and 70s into the 80s and 90s. And it's they're on an uptick now, but it's part of something. A lot of people are just like, hey, like my family moved out here, we were always Steelers fans, and that just carried over.
Yeah, it's interesting because whenever I watch a Steelers road game, and you just alluded to the number of Steelers bars. I mean, I have a good family friend who lives out in Denver, and there's a Steelers bar there. I mean, this is Denver, Colorado. I mean, this is on the other side of the country. So what is it? Because every time I watch a Steelers road game, it can be in San Diego, Los Angeles, Phoenix, Seattle, anywhere on the West Coast. And yet, Chris, there are thousands, not hundreds, thousands of terrible towels in the stands. What is it about Steelers fans that they travel to these away games? Do they travel from Pittsburgh, or are they already there in those cities to begin with?
That's where I was going to get to. It's a trick. It's not actually travel. I mean, there are a bunch of Steelers fans who travel all the time. I'm not going to, just discount them. But the majority of those fans you see, they're just there, or they're coming from another part of the country. But Pittsburgh is Pittsburgh. It's a small big city or a big small city, but it's not a metropolis like a Philly or a Chicago. It does have its own fan base in the city, but around the country, most of these got people that are there. They're Pittsburgh fans just located in different parts of the country. Like you go to you go to a Dolphins game when the Steelers go there. You'll be surprised by how many Steelers fans. San Francisco is one of those weird cities, like the whole West Coast. The Steelers fans are just there. It's just been a thing. A lot of people that I've talked to, because I've asked that question to a lot of fans that I've run into when I've been on the road covering the Steelers, and they'll say like, hey, or I moved out here, or my family moved out here, and it's just we grew up rooting for the Steelers. They've always been competitive, so there's never really a reason to leave them or get bored with it. And it's a pride, it's a fandom. You put on that jersey, you get excited, and you pull up that terrible towel, that cloth. It seems so silly, but that cloth, started in the 70s with Myron Cope, the legendary radio announcer for the Pittsburgh Steelers back then. He started this thing. It became a charity thing where all the money went to a small charity in Pittsburgh that he was tied to, and it became like the rallying symbol for Steelers fans and Steeler Nation everywhere. It's one thing that whenever I go on the road or I'm covering the Steelers, there's people that recognize me like, hey, I love your show, and it's just like it astounds me. And I've known it my whole life, but it astounds me every time, Alex, when I'm like, wow, this is even bigger than I thought.
Yeah, I'm putting two and two together here because I read an article several months ago that I was curious about this. Why do Steelers fans travel to these road games? And I read something interesting. It's not that they travel; it's that
they're there.
Is it true that, and you can probably attest this better than I can, being from Pittsburgh? Is it true that when the steel industry collapsed, what was it, around the 60s and 70s, that everybody just left Pittsburgh and okay, we put that, and then we combined with the rise of Terry Bradshaw and the boys back in the 70s. And that's where just this booming popularity of Steeler Nation started. Is that accurate?
I mean, partially. So not everybody left Pittsburgh, but it was a much bigger city when the steel mills were going. And then when that industry just shut down, there were a lot of jobs that were lost. And so people were like, you know what, I'm going to go to this part of the country where I can get a job. I'm going to go to this part of the country where I can get a job. And that's the thing. There's a lot of old misconceptions about Pittsburgh, like, oh, it's a dirty city. Pittsburgh has not been that steel mill, because it used to be a smoky, dirty city where there was a lot of air pollution constantly. That was the thing back in like the 50s, 60s, even part of the 70s. But that's been gone for decades. Pittsburgh is in fact more of a green city now, that focuses on those type of things. But yeah, that's exactly what happened. I was like I said, I was at that Cardinals game, over a decade ago, and I remember this guy sitting me, is like, my family moved out here, got jobs, and that's what it was. But yeah, it's absolutely, a lot of it is tied to that sort of diaspora of Steelers fans going all across the country. But it coincides with the Steelers being the best dynasty that we've seen in the NFL. No other team has ever won 4 Super Bowls in 6 years in the 1970s. And that built such a fandom. And there's even people that have gone to foreign countries and they are Steelers fans just because of that great run. And then ever since then, Chuck Noll through the 80s, they didn't win the Super Bowl, but they were competitive. They found ways to compete, even though they had some rough years. The 90s, Bill Cowher took over. They got to a Super Bowl. They were competitive. The 2000s, they won 2 more Super Bowls. And in the 2010s, they were always in the mix. So, it's a thing where if you're a Steelers fan, it's easy to attach yourself. Now, if you're a Pirates fan, it's very easy to detach yourself, because that's the situation. I've been alive for 33 years. They've been relevant for maybe 5 of those years. And that will change. There's a lot of Pittsburgh people who will be like, oh, okay, the Pirates, when they're good, I'll be excited about them. But the Steelers fans, it's every year they will show up.
What about the Penguins? Is that as big of a following as the Steelers?
So not as big. Football's king. NFL, especially NFL, it is king and over everything else in most places, and especially in Pittsburgh. But the Penguins are the number 2 in the city right now. They have absolutely, they've gone on the run. They've won 5 Stanley Cups, and that's in my lifetime. The 70s were before I was born, but Lemieux came in the 90s, Crosby came in the 2000s. They've had some amazing runs. They won 2 cups in the in 2016 and 17. And they have, I believe, the longest playoff streak in sports. So that's another team that, because they're consistently good, they can throw that around. They can say like, hey, you know what? We do this very well. So there's a big fandom there. But the one thing I'll say about the Penguins fans, when there was that lull between Lemieux and Crosby, no one went to games. There was a period where the Civic Arena was empty all the time, and the Penguins were really bad, and that's how they got a lot of those first overall picks to get Sidney Crosby, to get Jordan Staal, to get Evgeny Malkin, and then make moves to get Marc-Andre Fleury, Chris Letang, and the guys that built the nucleus that won a lot of these cups that they just won. But during that time, there was a fear that the Penguins were going to have to be sold and leave the city because it just wasn't working. Mary Lemieux bought the Penguins, stopped that from happening, and it has kept them in the city ever since. But with the Steelers, even when the thing is, the Steelers have never been that bad. Like the Steelers have only picked naturally in the top 10. I think the last time that happened was like 1989. So like they haven't put fans in the position to be that out of frame with the Steelers, and they've never had a Jets season, or a Browns season or a Bengals season with some of the years that they've had. It's always been like, hey, they're either really good, kind of good, in the mix fighting for the playoffs, or just missing the playoffs in that range in most of the years that I've been alive. So I think that part of it has made it easier for Steelers fans to stick around, but also, I mean, football just lasts. Like even when the Steelers aren't good and fans know it, they're going to show up.
It's consistency, and it's always being relevant with the Steelers and the Penguins. I talked about that earlier this offseason on Locked On Bearcats, how the consistency and being relevant every year is something that I want to see happen with not just the Bearcats, but also the Bengals. And because this is a Locked On Bearcats podcast, when we return after a word from Bet Online, Chris, I'm going to ask you about the River City Rivalry, because you are a Pitt alum, University of Pittsburgh. The rivalry between Pitt and Cincinnati, and the most famous play from that rivalry that took place at Heinz Field 13 years ago. Sorry if that brings back bad memories, but we'll get to it after a word from Bet Online, because they are your number one source for all of your betting stats and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, news, and odds, including this year's basketball championship matchup, the NHL Stanley Cup Final, Major League Baseball, and, of course, all the latest fighting news from MMA and UFC to boxing. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. We have an important favor to ask you. We put together a survey so we can learn more about listeners like you and make your favorite Locked On podcasts even better. This is your opportunity to tell us what you like and don't like about Locked On podcasts. So go to lockedonpodcasts.com/survey right now to get started. It won't take very long, and everyone that completes a survey can qualify for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Ticketmaster gift cards to take our audience survey. Go to lockedonpodcasts.com/survey. Thanks for your help. Chris Carter, the host of Locked On Steelers, my guest today. Chris, will we see you in Cincinnati week 1 for the Steelers-Bengals matchup?
Yeah, I believe you will. Unless something changes. I work for SteelersNow.com, so
yes,
we will be traveling. So yeah, you'll see me in Cincinnati. I've been there how many times now? I think I've only been there once for a game. Unfortunately, it was the game when Ryan Shazier was paralyzed.
Oh yeah,
I've ever traveled for another.
I was at that game.
Yeah, that was one of the that
Mhm.
I got to tell you, man. That I've covered so many sporting events. I've covered so many NFL games. I have never felt like, man, I really don't care what happens in this game at this point.
Yeah.
More than that moment. Like I just, and it was across the press box. Everyone's like, who cares who wins this game? Will that man ever walk again?
Yes.
And so it is a blessing that Ryan Shazier was able to not only walk, but dance at his wedding and living his life, fully after the fact.
I remember I was at that game, and I'm sitting I'm in the Riverside, towards the Riverside end zone. And I was with a friend of mine who is a Steelers fan, and he knew right away. I was like, okay, what's going on? He knew right away because he saw the hit on long-lost Bengals wide receiver Josh Malone. But that's good. We'll see you in Cincinnati. I'm sure you'll get your hands on some Skyline chili, maybe some Grater's ice cream there too. So you are a University of Pittsburgh graduate.
Yes, I am.
Pitt Law and how do I pronounce it? Cheney.
No,
Cheney. Okay, Pitt Law and Cheney. You're an alum of that, so you're an alum of University of Pittsburgh. The River City Rivalry no longer exists. I wish it did.
Sad, yeah.
But what do you remember about that rivalry and what it was like from a Pittsburgher's perspective?
I mean, there were some really good games. You know, you wanted to talk about 2012. That ain't the one that rips Pitt fans' hearts out, man. It's 2009. When you're up
Yes.
31-10, man,
Yep.
and you're feeling like, we got this. We're taking out the number 5 team in the country. And then you allow one of the worst comebacks in Pitt history and lose 45-44. That will rip your heart out. I remember that because I think I was at Cheney at the time because I think Cincinnati won the Big East that way. I was at Cheney at the time watching that on TV, and I'm just like, how did that happen, boys? And that was the one that kind of rips most Pitt fans' hearts out when you think back. But it is fun. And I think it's like the record's like 8-4 in favor of Pitt. Over time, and Cincinnati's gotten the more recent ones. But I just think it would be awesome if these two teams played now. The surgence that Cincinnati has had in recent years, I mean, making the college football playoffs. I thought, and Pitt didn't work out for Pitt because they weren't good enough to hold off some of their teams this past year, but they won the ACC championship this year. I would have loved to see Kenny Pickett and Desmond Ridder go at it in a big time college football environment. That would have been really fun to see, especially with all the talent. You got Alec Pierce at wide receiver versus Jordan Addison. You could just have so much talent just clanging up against each other. Kobe Bryant, Damari Mathis, and the Pitt pass rush versus Cincinnati's offense. It would have been ballistic. I think that would have been a highlight game. I do think that's one thing. We need to focus more on rivalries in college football.
Yes.
We're just in Pittsburgh. We're just getting back the backyard brawl, which is the long historic rivalry with West Virginia, which is I think Pitt's biggest rivalry in the history of their program. But like Penn State doesn't want to play Pitt. And everyone's just like, why? Like, it makes money. Everybody shows up. Everyone hates each other. It's awesome. And it's just, why don't you capitalize on making those things happen? So I would love to see more Pitt versus Cincinnati. I think college football gets in its own way too much when it comes to building those legendary rivalries.
Yeah, and rivalries are what make the sport so great. And like I think about being in a school like Cincinnati, our biggest rival is Miami, Ohio. Well, okay, the Bearcats have won every single game in that rivalry essentially since Ben Roethlisberger left. I mean,
right.
Come on, and I hope when Cincinnati goes to the Big 12, like a rivalry with Central Florida or Houston could start. Now, there is a chance, Chris, we might see a Kenny Pickett, Desmond Ridder matchup this year because both quarterbacks. I mean, the Steelers do go. They go to Atlanta this year, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe I'll find a way to go to that game. So we could see the rivalry in the NFL. Now, I'm going to ask you, and you already alluded to it, but the Pike-to-Binns play. How often do you think about that play? Because like
I said, that one's not too much. It's more so the comeback. I think Pitt fans have been through enough misery in their time, man. I'm not just a Pitt alum. Before I even went to Pitt for law school, I grew up in Pittsburgh, so like I rooted for Pitt everything, man. I'll go over the actual like heartbreakers, and most of them actually involve basketball. Football has its heartbreakers, but like 2003. It was the year Pitt had become really good at basketball again. They had been in the Sweet 16 for like 3 straight years, and this was the year that they were going to finally break through, get to the league, get to the Final Four, make it their yeir. And they had Brandon Knight, they had all these Julius Page, all these really good players, and they go up against this small little team called Marquette, and I'm like, they'll beat that team. And then there's one player on Marquette that's giving them the business, and this is eighth grade me. I don't know nothing better. And I'm like, who is this one man? Who is this one person who is just giving and like this one guard just crushes Pitt and beats him, knocks him out the Sweet 16, ends, and like Brandon Knight, his last year at Pitt, is crushed, and I'm heartbroken. I'm like, man, if that guy isn't like one of the best guards in the history of basketball, I'm gonna hate Pitt for the rest of my life. Well, turned out, Alex, that guard was Dwayne Wade.
Yep. He's probably going to be in the Hall of Fame someday. And
he's absolutely going to be in the Hall of Fame. He's top 5 for me in shooting guards. But Dwayne Wade doing that made me a fan of him, because then I saw how well he played for Marquette the next round. I was like, you know what? I'm going to root for this guy. And then he joined the Heat, one with Shaq, then one with LeBron. As soon as the Heat drafted him, I was like, that's my new team. So I've been a Heat fan ever since they've got Dwayne Wade. I like Jimmy Butler. So I was even rooting for him the last few years as well. So there's Dwayne Wade, but also Scotty Reynolds when Pitt did make the Elite Eight in 2009. 2009 was like a special time to be in Pittsburgh, man. You had the Steelers winning Super Bowl 43 with Santonio Holmes make that amazing catch against the Cardinals. You had the Penguins winning their first Stanley Cup with Sidney Crosby, their third in franchise history. And you had Pitt in the Elite Eight. They would have been in the Final Four if they just played a little bit of defense in the final seconds against Villanova's Scotty Reynolds, who got this crazy layup at the end of the game to take the lead back. So, to me, those are the heartbreaking moments. Certainly, though, Cincinnati. I mean, I'm telling you, man. Whereas the play in 2012, absolutely, that's crusher. But the lead, giving up a 31-10 lead when the Big East was on the line, you say that to a Pitt fan, they're going to be like, "Oh man, how'd that happen? That one still torches us, man."
That Pitt team had some talent. I mean, most notably Dion Lewis at running back, and I remember that game vividly, down 31-10. It was Marty Gilliard who
Yep.
had that long kickoff return for a touchdown. And then, of course, Pike-to-Binns and that missed extra point before Cincinnati's final drive that won them the game. So let me ask you this, because, I mean, obviously Pittsburgh sports and the two cities, very similar in terms of size, very similar in terms of population. I mean, the Ohio River, heck, has an affiliation with both cities. So let me ask you this. How do Steelers fans, Pitt fans, how do they view Cincinnati sports, the Bengals and then the Bearcats? How do they view Cincinnati sports? Because we view Pittsburgh sports here as, oh my God, they're so good every year. Oh, can the Steelers just ever suck again? I mean, well, they haven't sucked really since 19 whatever. And, we're so jealous because they're so good and they, prior to last year, beat us every time. So how do you in Pittsburgh view Cincinnati sports?
There's a bit of a mix. So I think with Cincinnati, there's just a respect. There's no, like, the University of Cincinnati, like the Bearcats. There's no hatred there. It's just more like, hey, that's another program that's smaller. They're not Alabama or Florida. They're not in the SEC or Michigan or Ohio State, but they're doing well. Like there's no animus there. It's like, hey, like, you're in kind of in the same bed as Pitt. Pitt's good program, just not one of the tops, and not going to get those shots. When you get the chance to make the college football playoffs, make that run and make it happen. So I don't think there's any animus there or anything. With the Bengals, it's your AFC North rival, and I think that it's interesting because for the longest time, it was more so just, hey, they're just the little brother in the division. Just you deal with them. You want to deal with them. They would sweep the Bengals, or the Bengals would get one, and then the Steelers would crush them. But there really became a hatred for Cincinnati during the Vontaze Burfict years, and primarily it was Vontaze Burfict. I don't think it would have happened much otherwise. But him in one season in 2015, he rips Le'Veon Bell's ACL, celebrates it in front, like over his body as he's laying there writhing in pain. He breaks Ben Roethlisberger's shoulder in the playoff game, in the same playoff game that he decapitates Antonio Brown, gives him a concussion, knocking him out of the next round of the playoffs. And in that way, he took out the Killer Bees in one season. And in the playoff game, the Steelers almost beat the Denver Broncos, who eventually went on to win the Super Bowl championship. But Ben Roethlisberger was way too hurt, couldn't make anything happen. Antonio Brown couldn't get cleared from the concussion protocol, and they were down to their fourth and fifth string running backs because Le'Veon Bell was gone, D'Angelo Williams was gone, another guy was gone. I forget who it was behind. It was Jordan Todman and Fitzgerald Toussaint who ended up fumbling in that game. So there was, it's more so that I think recently there's a lot of respect in the city of Pittsburgh for Joe Burrow because there's not a lot to hate about the guy. So it's kind of odd. I think Tyler Boyd, with his comments this year about how, about the Steelers and stuff, I think that sparked a few people because it's like, hey, Tyler Boyd, you're from here. Watch your mouth, man. But I think it's more so like right now it's like, hey, that was a good job, Cincy. Let's see y'all keep it up. So it'll be interesting to see with this Joe Burrow era, can Cincinnati kind of have a run where they're the best team in the division. They had some years where they would poke their head up with Andy Dalton, but that was Andy Dalton. Joe Burrow, first overall pick, a great college player. Can he make himself a consistently great NFL player? I think that's what a lot of Steelers fans are waiting to see, and we'll see how that develops as a rivalry because nothing makes a rivalry better than when both teams are beating each other and you have reasons to hate each other. For the Browns, there was no win the Browns could hold on to and like that can hurt the Steelers fans until that playoff loss. And when that playoff loss happened, then a lot of Steelers fans went from the Browns that's the adorable little brother that you beat up every year to the, oh, we hate those type of dudes. And now you see it's a little fiercer with that rivalry. There's more combativeness. And I think that's coming with the Steelers and Bengals with the rise of the young talent on the Cincinnati roster.
How about that? All right, when we return after a word from Rock Auto, Chris, I'm going to ask you your thoughts on the Cincinnati Bearcats, given that you are a University of Pitt alum, so you know a lot about the Bearcats from the Big East days. Man, I still wish that conference was still around. Anyway, with the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, by the way, this episode is brought to you by Rock Auto, it's now impossible for you to go to your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. So why do you want to endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry? Well, thankfully, you have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket, and you can save time and money when using Rock Auto. It's a family business. They've been serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Their prices are reliably low for every customer. They have everything you can need: brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. Go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution to your auto part needs. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, locked on in there. How did you hear about us box so they know we send you? Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Chris Carter, the host of Locked On, not the Hall of Fame wide receiver Chris Carter, although I'm sure that have you gotten any questions, Chris, about having the same name as Chris Carter, the Hall of Fame wide receiver? See, it appears maybe we have lost our connection with Chris Carter. Chris, can you hear us? Okay,
We're
did
back.
You get that question?
We're back. I don't know.
Okay,
I apologize. I was going. You were kind of fuzzy for a little bit, but we're back in order.
All right, that is good. Okay, so what I was saying is you have the same name as a legendary wide receiver, Chris Carter. Do people ever, say that to you?
Ooh. Bruh, first of all, I say it to myself. That was my first ever jersey my parents bought me, a little Chris Carter jersey from the Minnesota Vikings. Man, I used to run around, pretending I was catching touchdowns all the time as a little kid. I thought that was the coolest thing. Oh, but yeah, I get that all the time. There was one time Chris Carter went on NFL Network and said something bad about Ben Roethlisberger. I got death threats, Alex. People was like, "How dare you say that about Ben Roethlisberger? We will find you." And I was like, "Yo." First of all, y'all need to chill. Second of all, wasn't me. Don't even look like me. Our names aren't even spelled the same. So get it right. But certainly, and it was actually pretty funny. I got they kind of showed my tweet because I was just like, "Hey man," I tweeted about it. I was like, "Hey man, I'm not that Chris Carter," and they brought my tweet on Good Morning Football. So that was pretty cool. But I've always had a lot of appreciation for him as a player. I thought as a kid, I thought he was the best possession receiver I ever saw. So there are those mix-ups. It's in fact, it happened to me like a week or two ago when someone accused me of some of his off-field antics that he's gotten into, and I'm like, bruh, wrong dude. Like just look at the picture, man. They're not even the same.
How about that? Okay, so you went to the University of Pittsburgh. You know the Cincinnati Bearcats football program, a lot about them from their Big East days. Obviously, they're on a meteoric rise. How do you see the Bearcats program doing this year after losing 9 players to the NFL draft? And how do you see them once they join the Big 12? How do you see them doing once they get there?
I mean, I think one thing, Luke Fickell has done an amazing job with this program. He has really built them up. He's made them, and there's something to believe in there. And I really believe that there's something to it. It's not just the recruiting; it's getting guys to buy into your program, to want to stick around. Because there's plenty of dudes who be like, you know what, I blew up this year. I'm going to go to the NFL, or even worse, I'm going to transfer. Pitt just dealt with that with Jordan Addison, but there were so many players Pitt had, from Haba Baldonado to Kalijah Kancey to Brandon Hill, all these players that other programs were trying to peel away with NIL money, and none of them took the bait. Jordan Addison was the only one. That I think that's a testament. When you're a team like that and a team like Cincinnati that can hold on to a lot of your players and they get drafted from there, it speaks to the environment that your coaching staff has put together. And Luke Fickell, and also to his credit, he hasn't left. Luke Fickell, with his success in Cincinnati, I'm sure he was getting phone calls from Florida or LSU or, some major programs that dump a lot more money into football than University of Cincinnati can. So I have a ton of respect for what the Cincinnati Bearcats have done. They might take a step back this year, but I think that they're going to be able to reload quickly with the way that he's kept talent around. I saw that recently there were some kind of comments about like, hey, like, watch out, Big 12, we're coming. I think it's a shame that the Big 12 is, and there's going to be some exodus there from programs that are leaving it. But I do think that the Bearcats could be a force there, and that might even really help their case with making more college football playoffs in the future, going to the Big 12.
Still amazing to me that they accomplished that as a group of 5 team. Okay, so
Absolutely.
final question for you, Chris. And by the way, you also are on the Locked On NFL podcast, I believe,
Yes.
on Fridays, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay,
Your boy Q.
so be sure to check that out. Okay, so yeah, you said with your boy Q.
Yeah. Host of Locked On Raiders. Me and Q, we go at it all the time. I'll let you know. We did a top 5 receiver duos last week. I put Jamar Chase and T. Higgins in my top 5. He did not, Cincinnati fans. So y'all better go let your boy Q know what's wrong with him.
I guess that's what you get. I guess that's what you get for the Bengals beating the Raiders twice last year and ending the curse of the Bo Jackson curse. So maybe that's what. Now you have a rivalry with what now Las Vegas. I mean, one of the games I'm looking forward to this year is Raiders-Steelers on 50 years anniversary of the Immaculate Reception. I mean, that's going to be a fun night in Pittsburgh.
Oh, bruh, there's going to be lots to celebrate. If there's one thing Pittsburghers like more than Primanti's fries or anything like that, it's looking at the great history of the city. If you ever fly into Pittsburgh, Alex, when you come off your plane, you go down to baggage check-in, there's 2 statues of Pittsburgh history. There's George Washington when he fought in the Colonial War to get in the Revolutionary War, and right next to George Washington is Franco Harris catching the Immaculate Reception.
Wow. And that's in the airport. And that's in the airport.
As a statue right in the airport for everyone to see when you come through. There's so many, and that's one of the things when all those Pittsburghers, when people from around the country come to visit, they all stop and they take pictures with it because they're like, "Yo, it's Franco Harris." It is, to many people, it is still the greatest play in the history of the NFL. Not just because it's insane, that Terry Bradshaw just threw a pass like 40 yards downfield, it bounced off of the Raiders player, and then Franco Harris caught it and ran it all the way into the end zone for their first ever playoff win. But also because it was the play that a lot of people credit sparking the 70s dynasty. When they won that game, the Steelers were like, oh, we can do this. And then like in 2 years later, they added Lynn Swann and John Stallworth and Mike Webster and Donnie Shell and Jack Lambert. 5 Hall of Famers coming in one year of an NFL draft. You didn't even mention
Mean Joe Green.
And see, Mean Joe Green, he's the star. Well, he's the guy, he's the centerpiece.
Oh.
But he was there first. He was Chuck Noll's first pick. He set the tone, and then they added Franco Harris in 72, and they added Mel Blount, I believe, in 71. And Terry Bradshaw in 1970. So like they were building the pieces. But it was that 1974 draft that is the greatest draft class ever. That has 4 Hall of Famers that were selected, and then Donnie Shell, a 5th Hall of Famer, who came as an undrafted free agent that year for the Pittsburgh Steelers. That is the greatest class that anyone will ever have. And when Pittsburgh Steelers, you talk to Pittsburgh Steelers fans about that, they love it. So reliving that moment, talking about that moment, Steelers Raiders has kind of fallen off because the reason why they hated each other so much in the 70s because they were 1A and 1B. It was like Steelers Ravens, and how every year it just seemed like these teams were going to meet in the playoffs, and it was a bloodbath. Yeah, and you had great players. You had George Atkinson. You had Jack Tatum. You had Kenny Stabler. You had Casper. You had Willie Brown. You had all these guys that were just amazing football players on both sides of the ball. In fact, to me, one of the greatest matchups ever was the 1974 Raiders offensive line, the only offensive line in the history of the NFL to have 3 Hall of Famers playing on it at one point in time, was going up against the Steel Curtain defense led by Joe Green, and the Joe Green just decimated him. You talk about that rivalry, Steelers fans get giddy because it references the history, the culture of everything. That's going to be exciting. But hey, the Raiders came to Pittsburgh, beat them this year. I got to hang out, get some wings with your boy Q. I took him to the real best food spots in Pittsburgh, like William Penn Tavern, to get some kitchen sink wings. But it's less of a rivalry, more of just like a hey, we used to have that rivalry with them, and now it's just more so like we respect the Raiders, Derek Carr, they're cool, and it's just Steelers, they do want to beat them every year. It's just we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, now that the Bengals, have won a playoff game, because before this year they hadn't won a single playoff game in my lifetime. So now that they have won a playoff game, they've been to a Super Bowl, and they've, kind of, gotten rid of the old narrative that the Steelers were going to consistently beat them down. Like, I can appreciate all the history that you just gave, Chris, because like I do appreciate NFL history, and the Steelers are a big part of that fabric, and especially their rivalry with the Raiders in the 1970s. But final question I got to ask you, because before the Bengals won their playoff game, or 3 playoff games this past year, went to the Super Bowl, like every single time, like people knew I was a Bengals fan. They go, oh, hey, remember the playoff game in 2015, or, oh, you haven't won a playoff game in 31 years, more importantly. But I got to ask you, did Kimo von Oelhoffen intentionally shred Carson Palmer's knee in the playoffs in 2005? From a Pittsburghers perspective, did he or did he not intentionally shred Palmer's knee?
If you look at the replay, man, he was fighting off a block. He lost his balance and fell on Carson's leg. And you even see when he does it, he looks down like, oh man, he's a former Bengal. Kimo didn't want to do that. He didn't want to hurt Carson. It was a situation where like, hey, it's the game. I think Joey Porter put it best. It was like, man, like, that sucked. Like we had a lot of respect for Carson Palmer, but you would then accuse us of doing it on purpose. And it was like, all right, we lose our sympathy for you, buddy. And I think that's the kind of thing there. It's like, it's one thing to assert, like, to say like, oh, if a guy like did it after the play, Kimo fell on him. Like, that's a different situation than like, falling, like taking someone's helmet off and hitting them over the head with it. Like, that's a different situation. Or, Vontaze Burfict. I mean, Burfict was known for a guy like being, a guy like I watched plays where after the play was over, whistle blown, everyone's not doing anything, he would try to step on your foot on purpose. Like he would and like I remember like Ramon Foster even told me that he was like, watch this play, and there's a play where Ramon Foster plays over, everyone's going back to their huddle, and Vontaze Burfict sneaks up behind him and like picks his foot up and tries to stomp on his toe. And it's just like, why do that? That's where I think Kimo didn't have that kind of a nature when it came to how that moment happened. But certainly, I mean, if you're a Bengals fan, that kind of stuff has tortured you, because a lot of Bengals fans swore that was the year. And I would say John Kitna came in and played very well, after Carson Palmer went out. But, the Steelers, they rallied. Ben Roethlisberger started lighting it up in the second half, and they were able to rally to that. And then the only other time they faced in the playoffs was the 2015 year, where the Steelers were up 16-0. And then the Bengals rallied. They got that Vontaze Burfict interception, and then Ryan Shazier rips the ball out of Jeremy Hill's hands. That's a lot of trauma. I get having that pain, because to me, 2004, that was tough with Carson Palmer, but when you had the game won and everything's fine, and then Ryan Shazier just rips the ball out, like that would haunt me for the rest of my life. Yeah. I'd be like, how did they do this? And that would be one of those moments. So I think it's great that Cincinnati's won some playoff games finally. It's very much to your point. It's the first time in anyone's since since Boomer Esiason was the quarterback that this happened. Yeah. I think it's great, and I think it will help this rivalry get bigger over time. And who knows? Maybe you're looking at Joe Burrow and Kenny Pickett in a few years dueling it out. I don't think Kenny Pickett's starting this year, but I do think that in about 3 or 4 years, you're going to see him kind of emerge as the starter for the Steelers, a really good starter, and two teams that are in really good positions duking it out every year for the AFC North.
And yet the Steelers still mocked the Who Dey chant after that playoff game in 2005. So you say Kimo von Oelhoffen didn't intentionally do it, which I actually agree with you, because every time I watched the replay, it was Eric Steinbach who he was blocking, right? And yeah, it was just, he rolled into him. I don't think it was intentional. Yeah, he even did. He was like this, like, oh shoot, I just, injured Carson Palmer. So
Just look at his reaction on the play. You'll see him kind of just look there like he didn't celebrate. He was just looking at him like, oh man, this sucks. But I gotta say, the reason they made fun of that "Who Dey" chant was because the Bengals was talking a lot of smack that year. It was when they were at Heinz Field, and Bill Cowher did this. This was one of his great coaching moments. The week leading up to that playoff game, he showed a video of TJ Houshmandzadeh taking a terrible towel and cleaning his cleats off. And that's why they tell you in Pittsburgh, don't mess with the terrible towel, buddy. It comes with curses. And you saw after that, Carson Palmer gets hurt. The Bengals just start to stink again. They get broken up, and then Marvin Lewis has to rebuild everything. It's been a much known thing. You don't do that. So when they were doing the "Who Dey" chant, it was a bit of payback because they was like, oh, but again, that's Bill Great's rivalries because the Steelers have something to hate about the Bengals. The Bengals have something to hate about the Steelers. So when they play, whoever wins, there's this great feeling.
And now that the Bengals, have gotten the curse off their backs and they've been to a Super Bowl, I mean, it could be, like you say, a great rivalry for many years. And if only the Cincinnati Pitt rivalry in college could get back as well. Chris, this has been fun. I wish we had more time. Best wishes to you. I'm sure we'll cross paths during football season, and maybe I'll see you in Cincinnati week 1 on September 11th for the Bengals and Steelers in the season opener. I do think Kenny Pickett should start that game. I'm going to be honest.
Not going to.
He's not. So who do you think is going to start that game for Pittsburgh?
It's Mitch Trubisky. I can tell you as the person who's been there for every day of minicamp and OTAs, he's been the QB1. Kenny Pickett's doing a great job so far. He's bringing things along, but the Steelers, they don't rush their guys. They're going to say, hey, Kenny, we want you to be fully prepared before you take everything going. Joe Burrow might have taken the job right away, but Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, there's a lot of examples of guys that waited a little bit until they got their first start. Kenny Pickett will not be starting week 1 in my book unless Mitch Trubisky turns out to be that bad. But I'll tell you what, he's looked pretty good in minicamp and OTAs, launching some of those passes to Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, who's looked awesome, and Chase Claypool. So I do think it's going to be a fun game, but Mitch Trubisky will most likely be the starter.
All right, well, give me the Bengals then 38-21. I'm already gonna start the Bruin here. Check Chris Carter out, Locked On Steelers, every day after you listen to Locked On Bearcats. You can also check him out every Friday on Locked On NFL with your boy Q, host of Locked On Raiders. That's got to be a fun show to do every week. I'll be listening to that. Chris Carter, he also writes for Pittsburgh Steelers now. He's also the co-host of 11 Skylights, which is the high school football coverage in the city of Pittsburgh, and he's also a Pitt alum. Chris, thank you so much again for taking the time today to talk to us about why there are just so many Steelers fans in Cincinnati and what appears to be everywhere. Best wishes to you, and I'm sure we'll cross paths during football season.
Thanks, Alex.
Chris Carter, the host of Locked On Steelers, and how about that? He shares the same name with a Hall of Fame wide receiver. Anyway, that's going to do it for me today here on Locked On Bearcats, and this week. We'll be back next week. So much more to get to with recruiting. John Garcia Jr. hopefully will be back on the show next week. I can't wait for that. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Locked On Bearcats on YouTube. We're up to 194 subscribers and counting, so hit that subscribe button. You could be next. And don't forget, you can also like and share a comment on today's video as well. You can download, actually, we're up to 196 subscribers and counting. Don't forget, you can also hit that subscribe button on audio platform, Spotify, Stitcher, Apple, wherever you get your podcast. Share a comment and or give it a rating there. All of that helps more Bearcats fans like you find this podcast. The first picks of the Ultimate NBA Mock Draft have been made. Search now for Ultimate NBA Mock Draft to get over 50 insiders, the Odyssey Sports experts, the draft experts have Locked On NBA Big Board. The 5-episode Ultimate NBA Mock Draft is underway. Make Ultimate NBA Mock Draft your second listen today. You can follow me on Twitter at Frankie_Netty with 2 N's and an ATI. You can follow me on Instagram, AlexFrank9_, or email me at alex3frank@gmail.com. Have a great weekend. Have a great Father's Day weekend. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there, including my father, who is a very loyal listener to the Locked On Bearcats podcast. Thank you to him. And I will be back next Monday with another episode of Locked On Bearcats. Have a great Father's Day weekend. Enjoy the U.S. Open, Stanley Cup Final, and so much more in sports this week. Have a great weekend, and I will be back with you all on Monday.